When people talk about golden children, they often speak in hushed tones, like it's some myth passed around in family lore. But for me, it wasn't a myth. It was my reality. My younger sister, Emily, was born to shine. From the moment she could speak in full sentences, she was already reciting poetry at family gatherings. By the time she could tie her shoes, she was winning piano recitals and science fairs. Everything she touched turned to gold, or at least that's what our parents wanted the world to believe. Our family lived in a quiet suburban town in Ohio. My parents, Margaret and Frank, prided themselves on being model citizens. Lawn always trimmed, church every Sunday, smiles that never cracked. But behind closed doors, the expectations were clear. There was a hierarchy, and I wasn't at the top of it. Emily was tall, elegant, and graceful, the type who seemed born to walk through life without stumbling. She had the kind of charm that made adults fawn over her and teachers beam with pride. When she was named valedictorian of her high school, my mother threw a party so elaborate that it looked like a wedding reception. The local paper even did a feature on her. I still remember the headline, "Emily Morris, a star in the making." The same year I graduated from college with a degree in computer science. I had worked late nights at a diner to pay tuition, pulled all-nighters for finals, and cried alone in dorm stairwells when homesickness hit hard. But when I came home with my diploma, there was no party, no article, no celebration. Just a half, "Good job, sweetie," before my mom went back to helping Emily prep for her next modeling photo shoot. That's right, Millie wasn't just smart. She was beautiful. By college, she had already appeared in a couple of national print ads. Our living room, once filled with generic landscapes, now showcased framed, airbrushed photos of Emily smiling with perfect teeth, lit perfectly, hair blown just so. And my father, stoic, unemotional Frank, looked at those photos like they were trophies. Every guest that entered our house was led straight to that mantle. "That's our Emily," they'd say. "Isn't she something?" And then there was Mir, shorter, quieter, with unruly hair and an affinity for computers over cameras. While Emily was learning to walk in heels, I was teaching myself how to write code. While she was rehearsing lines for a pageant, I was building websites in my bedroom. And though I never said it out loud, I spent years quietly hoping that one day, my parents would see me the way they saw her. Not perfect, but worthy. But they did not when I landed my first internship at a major tech firm. Not when I got promoted before age 30. Not even when I bought my own house, something Emily had never done. Instead, they'd say things like, "That's great, honey. Have you seen Emily's latest magazine spread?" My body was different too. Emily had that long, lean figure that people envy. I had curves. Real ones. My mother once handed me a brochure for a weight loss program. At the dinner table, "Just something to think about, Rachel," she'd said, without meeting my eyes. "You'd look more like your sister if you just tried a bit harder." I wish I could say those words didn't hurt, but they did. Not all at once. They were the slow dripping kind, the kind that over time erodes something inside you. Your confidence, your sense of self, your belief that love is supposed to be unconditional. Eventually, I stopped competing, stopped trying, not because I had given up, but because I had finally realized you can't win a race that was never meant for you to finish. As I got older, I started building a life that felt like mine. Quiet, sincere, safe. I found friends who laughed at my dry humor and mentors who noticed my talents. I wasn't on magazine covers, but I was doing work I cared about. And in time, that began to feel like enough. But as much as I thought I had moved on, there was still a small, unspoken part of me that hoped, one day, my parents would look at me not through the lens of comparison. Not as the other daughter, but as Rachel, simply Rachel. That silent hope stayed buried until the day I announced my engagement. And that's when the illusion of family, the one I had learned to tiptoe around my entire life, finally began to crack. Because when a wedding comes into the picture, so does the question, who truly stands by you when it matters most? And that's where the real story begins. There's something about growing up in small-town Pennsylvania that makes family reputations feel like public property. The lawns were pristine, the neighbors polite, and every family had a label. The generous bakers, the churchgoers, or in our case, the Morris family with the perfect daughter. And that perfect daughter was my younger sister, Emily. Emily wasn't just the kind of child people admired. She was the kind they remembered. The kind who teachers used as a benchmark for other students. "Why can't you be more like Emily Morris?" I heard that more times than I care to recall. She had this polished elegance even as a kid, speaking clearly, walking confidently, and always knowing exactly what to say. People didn't just like Emily, they celebrated her. On the other hand, was Rachel. The older one, the quieter one, the one who had to wear hand-me-downs, while Emily got custom dresses for school recitals. At Christmas, she'd open her gifts first, and they were always dazzling designer shoes, a new camera, gold jewelry. Mine were thoughtful, but practical. Notebooks, socks, a sweater that looked warm. I used to think I was imagining things, that the favoritism wasn't real. But it was hard to deny when every shelf in the living room held pictures of Emily at the science fair, Emily at prom, Emily in a newspaper spread modeling for a local boutique. My photos. A few tucked behind ceramic angels and dusty candles, barely visible unless you knew where to look. She was the local celebrity. At age 14, she won a regional talent show, singing a song from Les Miserables. And our parents threw a party so extravagant you'd think she had just signed a record deal. That same year, I won second place in a statewide coding competition. My dad just nodded and said, "That's nice, Rachel," before turning back to ask Emily if she'd rehearse for the guests. Looking back now, I realized the favoritism wasn't just about the milestones. It was about the daily moments, the subtle signs. When Emily got a cold, my mother would cancel everything to make her soup and rub her back. When I was sick, she'd leave cough drops on the kitchen table and remind me to clean up after myself. When Emily had a bad day, they comforted her with ice cream and praise. When I had a bad day, I was told to toughen up. Our school years only made things more pronounced. Emily was class president and homecoming queen. She got voted most likely to succeed. I got voted most likely to be online, which was fair. I did love my computers. I had a knack for logic and problem solving. I built websites, fixed broken laptops, and taught myself how to code. But no one came to school to watch someone debug Python scripts. They came to watch Emily smile on stage, hear her sing, see her sparkle. I remember one Christmas when she gave her parents a framed collage of her modeling photos. They cried, literally cried. I had spent weeks hand-building a digital slideshow of our family photos, syncing them to their wedding song, and burning it onto a DVD with a custom label. They thanked me and placed it under the TV, where it sat, unopened for years. It wasn't jealousy. I felt it was invisibility. I spent years trying to make up for what I thought I lacked. I enrolled in clubs I had no interest in, just because my parents suggested it. I even attempted modeling at 19. It was a disaster. The photographer couldn't figure out how to frame me properly, whatever that meant. Emily never let me forget it. But the worst part wasn't Emily's success. It was how our parents used her success as the measuring stick for my worth. Every conversation came back to her. Every plan revolved around her. And no matter what I achieved, it was always, "That's great. But did you hear Emily just got featured in Philadelphia Style magazine?" Eventually, I stopped trying to compete. Because what's the point of climbing a ladder that's always leaning toward someone else's window? So I pulled back. I built my own world, a quieter one. I found joy in creating things, fixing broken code, solving problems that had nothing to do with beauty or stage lights. And while my parents were still busy curating Emily's perfection, I found something even more valuable: peace. But no matter how far I drifted emotionally, part of me still hoped that one day they would see me, not as a shadow or a second best, but as a person who had quietly weathered the storm and still stood tall. That hope, however small, flickered back to life when I got engaged. I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd be happy for me. That this moment would be enough to bring them closer. That maybe, for once, I could be someone they were proud of. I was wrong. And what happened next would not only shatter that hope, but finally force me to confront a truth I had spent my whole life avoiding. If this story resonates with you, take a moment to hit that like button. It helps more than you know. Share it with someone who might need to hear it today. And if you've ever gone through something like this, leave a comment below. We read every word. Don't forget to subscribe for more real stories that speak to the heart. When you're a child, love isn't something you question. It's something you expect, like warm meals, bedtime stories, or a hug after a scraped knee. But growing up in the Morris household, I learned early on that love wasn't always handed out evenly. Some children get soft glances and open arms. Others learn to read affection through absence. Through the spaces where it should have been, but WASN. Single quotes T. My earliest memories aren't of family vacations or holiday dinners. They're of watching from the hallway as my mom brushed Emily's hair whispering to her about how special she was. I remember peeking around the corner, waiting for my turn only to be told, "Rachel, the bathroom's a mess. Clean it before dinner." I was 7. Emily was 5, and she already shined brighter in my parents' eyes. It only got more obvious with time. By middle school, Emily was already being scouted for local ads and small modeling gigs. My mother would spend entire weekends driving her to fittings, snapping photos, rehearsing poses. When I asked if she could come to my science fair where I had built a small wind-powered generator, she said, "We'll see, honey. Emily has a shoot that morning." She didn't show. I told myself it didn't matter, that she was just busy. That one day, if I accomplished something really big, they'd notice. So I kept trying. In 8th grade, I got accepted into an advanced robotics program. I was the only girl in the group. I stayed late after school, building prototypes, even won a small scholarship for a summer tech camp. When I told my dad, his response was, "That's cool. But did you know Emily's new photo got picked for the Macy's catalog?" Cool. That word became a placeholder in our house. It was the reaction I got for every honor roll certificate, every project award, every win that didn't involve a camera or a stage. "Cool," they'd say, eyes already drifting to the next thing Emily had lined up. Even birthdays weren't mine. When I turned 16, I wanted something small, just dinner at our favorite diner and a few close friends. But that same weekend, Emily got a callback for a modeling job in New York. My birthday dinner was cancelled. "It's a big opportunity for her," my mom said. "We can do yours next week." We never did. I used to lie awake, wondering what I had done wrong. I wasn't rebellious. I got straight A's. I didn't party. I stayed out of trouble. So why did I always feel like an afterthought? Then came the comparisons. You could look just like Emily if you lost a little weight. Emily never struggles with her appearance. She's just naturally disciplined. "Rachel, maybe you should come with us to the gym this weekend." It wasn't just emotional distance. It was physical criticism. My mother signed me up for Zumba classes without asking, bought me books with titles like Eat Clean, Live Lean, told me to smile more, straighten my hair, wear makeup like Emily did. She never said, "You're beautiful, just the way you are," not once. I started skipping meals. Not because I wanted to be thin, but because I wanted her to notice, to say something, anything, but she didn't. Instead, she spent her energy crafting Emily's image. There were boards in our basement filled with magazine clippings and vision charts, what Emily's career could look like, what colleges she should apply to, what agents they were targeting next. It was a strategy, a campaign. My mother wasn't just a parent. She was a brand manager. And the brand was Emily, the perfect daughter. I was despaired by high school. I stopped trying to win their attention with achievements. I poured myself into things that made me feel in control: coding, gaming, puzzles, places where logic ruled and success didn't depend on beauty or applause. I found a strange comfort in machines. They didn't care if I was pretty. They just needed to be understood. And for a while, I made peace with that. I stopped chasing their approval and started building a quiet life on the edges of theirs. I kept my conversations short, my expectations lower, and my pain tucked neatly behind sarcasm and self-deprecating humor. But deep down, I still hoped. I hoped they would surprise me. That one day, I'd get a text just saying, "I'm proud of you," or that they'd show up to something, anything that wasn't Emily's. Hope is cruel that way. It lingers long after it's been starved. And then came the moment that would test that hope, in the most painful way: my engagement. I thought surely this would be the milestone where they'd finally show up for me. That a wedding, the most traditional family celebration of all, would be the bridge we needed. But what happened instead didn't just reinforce the past, it magnified it. And in the silence that followed their absence, I would discover something I had never dared to admit: that the love I'd spent my life trying to earn might never have been mine to begin with. It happened on a rainy Thursday in Chicago. I had flown in for a mid-sized tech conference, not one of the glitzy, keynote-filled ones you see plastered all over LinkedIn, but the kind where the coffee is lukewarm, the panels are awkwardly long, and most people are just hoping the Wi-Fi holds up. I wasn't even supposed to be there. A colleague had dropped out last minute, and my manager asked me to go. At the time, I didn't realize that a trip I nearly declined would change the course of my life. Jack was standing next to a vending machine, struggling to convince it to accept his crumpled dollar. I noticed the machine had a blinking red light out of service. I tapped him on the shoulder and pointed it out with a soft laugh. "She's down for the count," I said. He turned, smiled sheepishly, and said, "Figures. Even machines judge me." That line caught me off guard. Not just the humor, but the way he said it, with no need to impress, no rehearsed charisma, just a guy making the best of a moment. We ended up walking into the same breakout session and sitting next to each other. That was the beginning. What struck me most about Jack wasn't how he looked or what he did, though he was easy on the eyes and incredibly smart. It was how he listened. When I spoke, he didn't just wait for his turn to talk. He asked questions. He remembered details. He noticed the tiny things that had always gone overlooked, like how I stir my coffee counterclockwise, or how I flinch ever so slightly when someone brings up family. Most people barrel past those things. Jack leaned in. He never once compared me to anyone else, not to his exes, not to his coworkers, and certainly not to my sister who, yes, he eventually met. He liked my dry sense of humor, my long-winded rants about operating systems, and even my deep dives into obscure true crime documentaries. He once said, "You make the weird parts of the world feel like home." No one had ever told me I made anything feel like home. For the first time, I didn't feel like I had to shrink myself to be loved. I didn't have to mold my body into someone else's silhouette, or silence my opinions to make someone comfortable. Jack liked me unfiltered, unscripted, and absolutely un-Emily. We dated quietly for a while. He wasn't flashy or performative. He didn't post mushy captions on social media, or buy grand bouquets on Valentine's Day. Instead, he left handwritten notes in my laptop bag and learned how to make my favorite soup when I was sick. One night, after I'd had a particularly hard day at work, I came home to find him waiting with takeout and an old movie queued up, The Philadelphia Story, my comfort film. He remembered that from a single offhand comment I'd made months earlier. Love didn't arrive like a thunderclap. It arrived like that quiet, thoughtful, constant dot after 4 years, on a regular Friday evening, while we were sitting on the couch in sweatpants, with Chinese takeout and reruns playing softly. In the background, Jack turned to me and said, "I can't imagine doing life without you. Will you marry me?" No ring hidden in a desert. No camera crew hiding behind the couch. Just us. As we were, simple, messy, true. I said yes, not because I was swept off my feet, but because I felt grounded for the first time. This man saw me, the real me, and he chose to stay. When I told my parents, I expected surprise, maybe even joy. I knew better than to hope for a parade, but I thought just maybe this would be the moment they'd finally celebrate me. Instead, there was silence. My mum stared at the floor. Then she cleared her throat and asked, "Are you sure? You might want to work on your appearance a bit before the big day." My dad mumbled something about hoping it wasn't rushed. There were no hugs, no smiles, just the quiet undercurrent of disappointment. As if I had skipped a line that wasn't meant for me. I tried not to let it show, but inside, I was splintering. For years I had prepared myself for their absence in spirit. But now, I started to fear they might be absent in body too. At our engagement dinner, they huddled in the corner, whispering over my mother's phone. Jack later told me they were talking to Emily, who was crying. This wasn't the plan. He overheard she wasn't supposed to go first. Even now, years of progress couldn't shield me from the sting of that line. Still, I pressed on. I focused on planning a wedding that felt like a sentiment. Warm, real. My mother-in-law stepped in the way my own mother wouldn't. She helped me choose a dress, folded paper cranes for centerpieces, and cried when I walked down the aisle at the final fitting. Every moment that should have been shared with my mother filled with quiet grace. And yet, through all the beauty, a shadow lingered. Not because I doubted the love I had found, but because I finally saw, with painful clarity, the love I had never received. It would all come to a head soon, when the RSVP cards stopped arriving, when my calls went unanswered, and when I stood at the altar, facing rows of smiling guests, except for 2 seats in the front that remained heartbreakingly empty. And it was in that absence, not just of people but of intention, that the truth I had feared all along would finally stand before my undeniable and shock. I had never been enough for them, and maybe I never would be. Weddings are supposed to be joyful chaos, overcooked chicken, crying flower girls, last-minute seating changes, and people dancing badly to 80s hits. But above all, they're meant to be filled with love, with family, with presence. That's what I kept telling myself during the months leading up to ours, that no matter what had happened in the past, surely, my wedding would be the moment we all came together. I was wrong. From the start, planning the wedding felt like trying to hold on to something that kept slipping through my fingers. I had always imagined that one day, My mother would help me zip up dresses in boutique fitting rooms, cry when I walked out in white, and offer sage advice passed down through generations. But that image shattered quickly. She wasn't interested. She never asked about the venue, never commented on the save dates. And when I sent her a few dress options, she responded with a single sentence. That one looks practical for your figure. Not beautiful, not elegant, just practical. As if she was picking out a church robe, not the most meaningful dress of my life. When I asked if she wanted to help with planning, she told me she was just so swamped with work, and that I should talk to Emily. My sister, who wasn't even engaged at the time, already had entire Pinterest boards filled with wedding inspiration floral themes, designer gowns, destination ideas. My mom had been contributing to those boards for years, but for me, nothing. Jack's family, however, stepped in with open hearts. His mother's sweet, thoughtful, and refreshingly maternal treated me like I was her own. She took me dress shopping. She brought over cake samples and color swatches. When I couldn't decide on centerpieces, she sat with me in my living room for hours, folding napkins and making mock table setups. She cried with me, when I broke down at the thought that my parents might not show up. They'll come, she said. Of course they'll come, but even as she said it, I could see in her eyes that she was just hoping to soothe a wound neither of us could truly bandage. We sent the invitations, both digitally and by mail. I triple-checked the addresses. I even sent reminders. And still, no RSVP from my parents. I called, left voicemails, even emailed. The responses were vague. We're not sure yet. We have to check some dates. It's a busy season. Busy for what? It was their daughter's wedding, so I moved forward, carrying a growing ache with me. The day of the wedding was beautiful early autumn in Ohio, leaves just starting to turn. We chose a garden ceremony at a local inn, with long wooden tables, under string lights and hand-picked wildflowers in mason jars. Everything felt like US simple, warm, unpretentious. People smiled and laughed. Jack looked at me like I was the only person in the world, and for moments, I believed I could pretend the hurt didn't exist. But then I'd glance toward the front row to empty seats, reserved with handwritten name cards, Margaret and Frank. My parents dot, and every time I looked at them, the joy in my chest twisted into something else, something sharp. When the music started for the father-daughter dance, the DJ approached and quietly asked, "Should we skip this part?" I nodded. I had told myself I wouldn't cry. But there it was, the silence of absence ringing louder than any song. During dinner, Jack stood to give a toast. He thanked everyone, said beautiful things about us, and when he raised his glass, I caught a glimpse of my mother-in-law, wiping away tears. She looked at me like I was worth celebrating, like I mattered. It should have been one of the happiest days of my life. And in many ways, it was. But there was also grief threaded through every smile, every laugh, every hug. Grief for a relationship I had spent years trying to nurture, one that withered no matter how much I watered it. Grief for all the birthdays, milestones, and holidays where I had settled for crumbs of love. Grief for realizing that even the most significant day of my life wasn't enough to make them choose me. When we returned from our short honeymoon in Vermont, I tried to reach out one last time. I called my mother. She picked up on the third ring. I asked, gently, why they hadn't come. Her response stunned me. "We never got a proper invitation," she said coldly. "You left us out." I paused. "We sent it. I have the tracking receipts. You even opened the email. I saw the read receipt." Well, we never felt included. And just like that, I realized what was happening. Gaslighting, not forgetting, not miscommunication. A choice, a narrative, a refusal to acknowledge the harm, because it was easier to paint me as careless than to accept their own cruelty. I didn't argue. I just hung up. Later that night, Jack sat beside me on the porch, holding my hand as the sun dipped below the trees. I hadn't said anything, but he could feel the weight of it. I turned to him and asked quietly, "Do you think they ever loved me?" He squeezed my hand and said, "I think they loved the version of you they wanted to exist, but not the real you." That truth, however painful, felt like a release. The wedding, in all its beauty and heartache, had finally shown me everything I needed to see. And though my parents hadn't stood with me that day, I had stood with strength, with grace, with love, and I wasn't standing alone. And in the aftermath of that day, something inside me shifted. Because the real pain wasn't just their absence at the wedding, it was the undeniable confirmation that they had never truly wanted to be part of my life unless it fit their script. But the story I was writing now, it was finally mine. A few weeks after the wedding, when the flowers had wilted and the thank you cards had been sent, my phone lit up with a message I had long dreaded and somehow still expected. It was my mother. "We need to talk. This has gone on long enough." Number apology, no explanation. Just a demand, wrapped in the same coldness that had followed me my whole life. Still, something in me decided it was time. Not because I believed they would understand, but because I needed to say the words I had swallowed for 30 years. We agreed to a phone call. Not in person. Too much risk of backpedaling or forced smiles. I wanted a clean line, unfiltered, and unavoidable. The call began like a courtroom opening argument. My mother launched in first, her voice sharp, steady, and rehearsed. "You embarrassed us," she said, "telling people we didn't show up, making us look like villains. Do you know how many relatives are now refusing to attend Emily's engagement party because of what you said?" I sat there in silence, listening, not because I had nothing to say, but because I wanted her to finish the fantasy she was spinning. When she paused, I took a breath I didn't know I'd been holding and said something I had never allowed myself to say before. "You're right," I told her. "I am jealous." There was silence on the line. The kind of silence that hangs between people who suddenly don't recognize each other. "But not in the way you think," I continued. "I'm not jealous of Emily's career, her photo shoots, or her fiancé. I'm jealous of the way you love her. The way you show up for her. The way you look at her like she's the best part of your life, and then look right through me like I'm something to be endured." My father cut in then, voice defensive. "That's not fair, Rachel. We've always treated you both the same." "No, Dad," I said, and this time my voice didn't shake. "You haven't. You didn't come to my graduation dinner because Emily had a modeling callback. You canceled my 16th birthday plans to take her to New York. You hung her headshot above the fireplace and gave me a pat on the back when I got my first job in tech. I remember every little moment when you made it clear that I wasn't the one you wanted to celebrate." They tried to interrupt, but I didn't stop. "I wore dresses you told me didn't suit my body. I ate salads I didn't want to eat. I sat through conversations where you praised Emily's every step while pretending mine didn't exist. And I stayed quiet for years, because I thought if I just worked harder, loved better, earned it, you'd finally see me." My mother's voice cracked with indignation. "You never said anything before. How were we supposed to know?" "I did say something," I replied. "You just didn't listen. You only heard what confirmed your version of me, the one who was difficult, dramatic, never quite enough. And when I finally gave up trying to win your approval, you called it distance, coldness, disrespect." Then I said what hurt the most. "When you didn't come to my wedding, it didn't just break my heart. It confirmed what I always feared, that I could be glowing with love in the most important moment of my life, and you still wouldn't see me as worthy of showing up." There was a long pause. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd hear me. But what came next was exactly what I had always received. "You're overreacting," my mother said. "You've always been too sensitive. We were hurt too, you know. You excluded us. You made us look bad." And just like that, the mirror shattered again. It was never going to be a conversation. It was a deflection, a defense, a desperate attempt to rewrite history with themselves as the victims. My father spoke again, colder this time. "Maybe it's time we stop pretending we're the bad guys if that's what you've already decided." That's when I realized this wasn't a confrontation for them, it was one for me. I didn't need their apology to heal. I needed to hear myself speak the truth out loud, without shame. So I said one last thing, with more clarity than I've ever spoken in my life. "You taught me something. Not intentionally, but you did. You taught me that I can survive without your approval. That love isn't something you beg for. That family isn't defined by blood or wedding attendance, but by who holds your hand when you're afraid and shows up when it matters. You didn't raise the version of me you wanted, but you did raise someone strong enough to walk away from this." My mother sighed, but said nothing, and I hung up. The silence afterward was different this time. It wasn't heavy or punishing. It was quiet, peaceful, like the air after a storm finally passes. That night, I stood on the porch with Jack, watching the breeze ripple through the maple trees. He didn't ask what happened. He just reached for my hand and held it. "They're never going to change, are they?" I asked. "No," he said gently, "but you have." And that was the truth I needed, because the girl who spent years begging to be chosen had finally chosen herself. And though I didn't know it yet, this conversation, this painful reckoning, would mark the beginning of a new chapter. One where love wasn't something I had to earn, but something I could finally receive. A few mornings after that final conversation with my parents, I received a text message that made my stomach drop, not because it was angry, but because it was so perfectly polished. It was from Emily, the sister who had spent most of her life soaking in praise and tiptoeing over my presence, now decided it was time to step in, but not with apology, not with empathy, with control. Her message read like a PR statement, dipped in condescension. Rachel, I heard about your conversation with Mom and Dad. What you said was totally inappropriate. They've given us everything. You can't just rewrite history because you're upset with how your life turned out. I read it twice, then a third time. Not out of confusion, but because I couldn't believe how quickly she had managed to twist pain into guilt. There was no concern, no curiosity, not even an acknowledgement that maybe my feelings had a place in this family too. But Emily had always been skilled at the subtle jab, cloaked in gracious language. That was her signature. Went on in the text. I understand that your wedding didn't go how you hoped, but that doesn't give you the right to sabotage mine. Not everything has to be a competition. There it was, the narrative. That I was the jealous sister, the bitter bridesmaid, the one raining on her parade because I couldn't handle her spotlight. I didn't respond, not because I didn't have 1,000 things to say, but because I finally understood. Replying would only feed her performance. So, I blocked her number. It should have ended there. But Emily, true to form, doesn't tolerate being ignored. Later, that day, Jack called me at work. He was laughing, not the joyful, carefree kind of laugh, but the stunned, can you believe this sort of laugh. She texted me, he said. My heart stopped. What? She found my number somehow, maybe through a mutual acquaintance, and sent me a whole essay. I rushed home, and we read the texts together, each one more bizarre than the last. As Rachel's sister, and someone who deeply values family harmony, I feel it's my duty to reach out to you directly. Rachel can be emotionally impulsive. I hope you can help her see reason. As her husband, you now play a key role in guiding her toward what's best for the family. Jack, bless him, stared at the screen with raised eyebrows. She thinks I'm her therapist, or her handler, but the most revealing part came near the end. Maintaining healthy relationships with successful family members like myself could benefit your future as well. Rachel's behavior is only hurting her prospects and, possibly yours. It was like watching a soap opera written by someone who believed manipulation was diplomacy. Emily didn't just want me to fall back in line. She wanted Jack on her side too. She had always known how to turn people in high school. She did it with my friends. If someone liked me too much, she'd swoop in with compliments, secrets, or smiles that somehow made them forget I was even in the room. If that didn't work, she'd casually drop a story about how Rachel can be a little intense sometimes. This was the same playbook. Different decade. Same strategy. But what Emily hadn't accounted for was Jack's unwavering ability to see through masks. His reply was perfect. Thanks for your concern about Rachel's well-being. As her husband, I support her happiness, not manage her behavior. I suggest you direct any future concerns to her. Have a good day. She sent one last message. I see she's poisoned you against us too. Don't say I didn't try to help when this all blows up. It didn't make me angry. It made me tired. And in a strange way, grateful. Because nothing exposes someone's character faster than their attempts to control what others think of you. Emily hadn't reached out to understand me. She had reached out to reframe me, to cast me, once again, as the unstable, ungrateful sister who needed correction. But this time, no one was buying it. Especially not the man who had seen me truly. Seen me since the day we met. Instead of feeling trapped in her narrative, I felt free. We closed her messages and opened a map, picking a weekend cabin getaway just a few hours north. We laughed over her dramatics, toasted to truth, and packed light. For once, I wasn't the one trying to fix a broken relationship. I was simply choosing peace. What I didn't expect was how this would trigger a shift in the extended family, because as Emily tried to regain control of the narrative, something unexpected began to happen. The rest of the family started asking questions, and in that quiet unraveling, another truth would emerge, one that had been buried for years. Peace doesn't always arrive with a grand announcement. Sometimes, it tiptoes in after exhaustion. After the shouting is over, after the tears dry, after you've reread the same text message 20 times, and still can't believe the person who sent it once shared your childhood bedroom. For me, peace came not with closure, but with clarity. After Emily's failed attempt to manipulate Jack, I felt something shift deep inside. Not anger, not sadness, just stillness. I didn't feel like arguing anymore. I didn't feel the urge to prove myself, to explain the past, or to change anyone's mind. I had finally stopped waiting for the people who hurt me to understand why it hurt. And that stillness, it was freedom. I started saying no in ways I never had before. No to answering messages that reeked of guilt tripping. No to showing up at family dinners where I knew I'd be politely tolerated and quietly judged. No to pretending we were still some tightly knit, all-American family with matching Christmas pajamas and a group text filled with heart emojis. That illusion had been shattered long ago, and I was done taping it back together. For years, I had believed that family meant sacrifice. That being the bigger person meant constantly reaching out, forgiving without apology, and accepting less love than I deserved just to keep the waters calm. But calm isn't the same as peace. And silence isn't the same as healing. Jack and I started filling our calendar with things that made us feel alive: visits to small towns, quiet bookstores, early morning walks before the city woke up. We hosted dinners with friends who listened, laughed, and lingered long after dessert. We built something small but sacred, a home that didn't require masks, where no one had to earn affection or tiptoe around someone else's ego. One afternoon, while sipping coffee on our tiny back porch, I realized it had been weeks since I had thought about my parents with longing. Not because I didn't care, but because I had stopped needing their approval to feel whole. It's a strange thing to admit out loud that you love your family, but loving them from afar is the healthiest choice you can make. It feels un-American, almost. We're told to stick together, to forgive endlessly, to be grateful no matter what. But what happens when that loyalty becomes a leash? When blood is the rope that pulls you back into versions of yourself you worked so hard to outgrow. Walking away isn't betrayal. Sometimes, it's the bravest kind of loyalty, the kind you give to your future self. I didn't make any big declarations. I didn't announce a breakup. I simply stopped showing up to places that required me to shrink. And strangely, no one asked where I'd gone. Maybe they were too busy preserving their version of the story to notice mine was being rewritten elsewhere. Others noticed. Quietly, softly, people began to reach out. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years messaged me after hearing whispers about the wedding fallout. "I just want you to know," she said, "I always saw how different things were. For you." That one sentence did more to validate my pain than 3 decades of small talk with my parents. When people ask now if I still speak to my family, I tell them the truth. I speak to those who speak to me with respect. I love those who love me, without condition, and I no longer chase anyone just because we share a last name. They usually nod. Sometimes they look uncomfortable, but often they look relieved, like they've been waiting for permission to say the same thing about their own lives. Because the truth is, there are many of us out here. Quiet survivors of polite dysfunction. People who looked like they had perfect families in Christmas cards, but spent those same holidays crying in locked bedrooms. People who were told to be grateful, even as they were being emotionally starved. And when we finally walk away, not in anger, but in peace, we aren't burning bridges. We're simply refusing to carry the weight of silence any longer. There's a moment I think back too often. A few weeks after the wedding, Jack and I were hiking in the Appalachian foothills. It was early morning, the kind of quiet that wraps around you like a blanket. We stopped at a ridge, looked out over miles of orange-tipped trees, and he said, "You seemed lighter," and I was. Because peace, I've learned, doesn't always come from fixing what's broken. Sometimes, it comes from building something better in its place. And while I hadn't planned to make that ridge the symbol of my new life, standing there with the man who chose me fully without preconditions or comparisons, I knew I had already crossed a threshold. The family I was born into shaped me, but the family I chose, that's the one that's healing me. And that healing is slow, imperfect, but mine was just beginning to ripple into places I never expected. The thing about truth is, it doesn't need to shout. It waits patiently while lies scramble to hold their shape. While blame gets tossed around like a hot potato, the truth just stands there, quiet, steady, inevitable. It began unfolding slowly, like cracks in a frozen lake. At first, they were small. A text from a cousin who hadn't come to Emily's engagement party. A voicemail from an aunt I hadn't heard from in years. They didn't come at me with accusations or pity. Just questions. "I heard your parents didn't go to your wedding. Is that true? I always wondered why you were so quiet at family events." Honestly, I thought something felt off. I wasn't trying to start a movement. I had never once told anyone to take sides. All I ever did was tell the truth calmly, plainly, without adding glitter or venom. When people asked why my parents weren't at the wedding, I told them what happened. I didn't smear them. I didn't raise my voice. I just said what was real. And the truth, as it turns out, didn't need my help spreading. Because people remember. They remember the years Emily's victories were blasted across every family email chain, while mine were mentioned in passing, if at all. They remember how I showed up to every birthday and graduation, how I listened and supported, even when no one clapped for me. They remember the tone in my mother's voice, the subtle ways she turned conversations back to Emily, the small digs, masked as concern. One by one, the pieces connected for them. Not because I was persuasive, but because the story they'd been fed for years no longer made sense. And that's when something truly unexpected happened. People began pulling away from me, but from them. Several relatives declined invitations to Emily's bridal shower. One aunt openly said she didn't want to attend a celebration orchestrated by people who couldn't show up for both their daughters. An uncle who had always played neutral finally spoke up during a backyard barbecue. I should have said something years ago, he told me, gently, but I see you now. My parents, predictably, didn't handle this shift well. They called it a smear campaign, claimed I was spreading false stories out of spite, that I had poisoned the family against them, because I was jealous of Emily's lavish wedding. The irony, of course, was that I hadn't said anything they couldn't confirm themselves. Most of the details came from their own silence, their own absence, their own unwillingness to show love where it was needed. The harder they tried to explain away the damage, the more obvious it became who had really caused it. And Emily, she doubled down. She started telling people that I was fragile, that I had created drama to feel important. But each time she reached for control, her grip slipped a little more, because by then, people had started to notice the difference between performance and sincerity. The tipping point came at a small family get-together, hosted by a cousin on my dad's side. It was casual grilled food, folding chairs, paper plates. At one point, someone asked about wedding photos. I smiled and offered to pull them up on my phone. Before I could, my mother, who had unexpectedly decided to attend, stood up and said, "Let's not make this about Rachel's wedding again. We've already been made out to be the villains once, no need to dwell on it." The whole backyard went quiet. She hadn't yelled, she hadn't cried, but the defensiveness in her voice, the bitterness, it was jarring. Especially because no one had brought up blame. No one had accused her of anything. Her words exposed what I hadn't needed to say. Later, as people left in small waves, a cousin pulled me aside and said, "You didn't ruin their image. They did." That's the strange, beautiful thing about truth, when it's finally spoken, when it's allowed to exist outside of whispering corners. It doesn't just shift perceptions, it shifts power. For years, I believed that my silence was the noble thing, that staying quiet meant keeping the peace. But now I saw what that silence had really done. It protected the people who hurt me and left me to carry the shame alone. Not anymore. I no longer felt responsible for other people's comfort. I wasn't telling my story to make them look bad. He was telling it so I could breathe. And in doing so, I had unknowingly given others permission to see clearly. Truth didn't need to scream. It just needed space. And now that it had it, the next chapter was ready to unfold, not in whispers, but in full voice. There's a grief no one talks about, the grief of letting go of the family you always wished you had. Not the loss of people through death, but the loss of a fantasy. The realization that the version of your parents you kept hoping would show up was never real. That's the kind of grief that doesn't come all at once. It arrives slowly, over years, like fog creeping in under the door. For most of my life, I held on to this image of what a good family should be. You know, the one, Sunday dinners, shared laughter, support without strings attached. I watched it on TV. I saw glimpses of it in my friends' homes. And even though it never quite matched my own experience, I clung to the hope that one day, maybe if I said the right thing, or accomplished enough, they'd finally love me the way I needed them to. I'd imagine my mother brushing my hair and telling me I was beautiful, even when I didn't feel like it. I imagined my father beaming with pride at one of my achievements, pulling me into a hug, saying, "I'm so proud of you, kiddo." I imagined family holidays that didn't end with someone crying in the bathroom or walking on eggshells. But those moments never came, and somewhere along the way, the pretending got heavier than the truth. After the wedding, after the conversations and revelations, I found myself staring down a hard question. Who am I if I stop trying to fix this? If I stop waiting for apologies, stop hoping for a birthday call that won't come, Stop pretending the next reunion might be different. At first, it felt like failure, like giving up on something sacred. But slowly, it began to feel like freedom. Letting go didn't mean I stopped loving them. It meant I stopped contorting myself to be lovable by them. I stopped shrinking to fit their comfort. I stopped editing my story to protect their version of who I was. And in that space, something new grew. Instead of chasing their affection, I started noticing the love that had always been around me, quiet, consistent, unglamorous. My husband, Jack, who never asked me to be anything but myself. Friends who showed up unasked, who remembered the little things. My mother-in-law, who cried at my wedding when my own mother didn't bother to RSVP. That's what family looks like. To me now, it's not about shared blood or matching last names. It's about presence, choice, respect. It's about being seen in your worst moments and still being welcome to the table. I've learned that some people only love you conditionally, when you stay in your assigned role, when you don't disrupt the story they're telling about themselves, and the moment you step outside that role, the love disappears. That's not love. That's control dressed up in sentiment. Real love doesn't ask you to disappear. It doesn't ask you to sacrifice your truth for someone else's comfort. It doesn't vanish when you say, "I'm hurt." My parents had built an image of the perfect family. Polished, beautiful, worth admiring. And for years, I tried to fit into that frame. But no matter how much I adjusted, I was always a little too loud, a little too soft, a little to me. It wasn't until I stepped out of that picture that I realized it had never truly included me in the first place. So I stopped trying to squeeze back in. And once I did, I could finally breathe. Now, when people ask about my family, I don't flinch. I tell the truth, not the dramatic version, not the sugar-coated one. Just the honest, human story of a woman who spent years trying to be enough, and finally realized she already was. Letting go wasn't the end, it was the beginning of something real. And as I began to live that truth out loud, something unexpected happened. My story started helping other people find their own voices too. That's when I knew, maybe this wasn't just about healing the past, maybe it was about creating a new legacy altogether. For most of my life, I thought victory meant winning them over. I thought it would look like a phone call from my mother, finally saying, "I'm sorry." Or maybe my father pulling me aside during a family gathering, placing a hand on my shoulder and admitting, "We were wrong. You deserved better." I imagined that kind of closure would heal everything, the missing years, the empty seats, the hollow applause. That if I just said the right words, if I waited long enough, they would come around. But they didn't. And, somehow, I still won. Because the real victory wasn't about convincing them to love me. It was about learning to love myself without their permission. It was about standing in the aftermath of their absence and realizing I hadn't collapsed, I had risen. My life now doesn't look perfect. Jack and I still argue about whose turn it is to do the dishes. We still live in a modest home with a leaky faucet and a squeaky screen door. But every corner of it holds peace. Not performative, not conditional, just peace. We host game nights with friends who've become chosen family. We laugh until our cheeks hurt. We take weekend road trips to small towns with antique stores and diners, where the waitress calls you hun and tops off your coffee without asking. We sit on the porch during thunderstorms, holding hands in silence. Not because we need to fill the air, but because we don't. There's no grand spotlight, no staged photo ops, just a quiet, full life. And that life, it's mine. Every imperfect, beautiful bit of it. I no longer spend hours replaying conversations in my head, or writing imaginary letters I'll never send. I don't waste energy trying to decode cold text messages, or wondering what I did wrong, when the truth is I didn't do anything wrong. I simply stopped fitting into a role that was never meant for me. That's what living unapologetically looks like. It's not loud. It's not about revenge or proving them wrong. It's about showing up fully, as you are, and not asking anyone to clap for it. It's walking into a room, and not shrinking. It's choosing joy without justification. There's a photo Jack took of me not long ago on a Sunday morning. Hair unbrushed, sitting cross-legged on the couch in an old college sweatshirt. Coffee in hand, sunlight spilling through the window. I didn't even know he took it until later. When I saw it, I didn't notice flaws or imperfections. I saw a woman at peace in her own skin. That's the version of me my parents never knew. But that's okay, because I know her now. And she is not bitter. She is not broken. She is not desperate for anyone's approval. She is loved. She is becoming. And she is finally free. If you had told me 5 years ago that I'd find healing not through reconciliation, But through release I wouldn't have believed you. I thought healing meant repair. Now I know it often means rebuilding. Not everything broken has to be fixed. Sometimes, it needs to be left behind so something new can grow in its place. That's the real victory. Living a life rooted in truth. Surrounded by people who see you, love you, and never ask you to be anyone but yourself. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. The most radical thing you can do, after being made to feel small for so long, is to live loudly in your joy and quietly in your peace. No permission, no apology, just you as you are. And that is enough.